All right, shall we jump in?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, welcome. We're glad you're here.
We're very glad you're here.
Because if you weren't, we'd feel lonely.
And loneliness is one of the great forces in life that drives us. It's one of the things that motivates us to want relationships, try to stay in them, keeps us in them. And it's ironic because we're born alone and we die alone. So we know that we're living in this kind of alone sandwich, right? And that kind of drives us to explore relationship in between as the filling.
So there's no avoiding aloneness. And the key is making the transition from being okay alone to being okay with other and not feeling lonely when the other is or isn't present. So we have to come, if we want to come to terms with relationship in our lives, we have to come to terms with aloneness. And that's the big factor that pushes also what our primary motivation is, which is the awakening. And the awakening is fundamentally coming to terms with the aloneness of the ego in the world. Because as an ego, put in your name, you're always alone, right? There's Ava, and Ava will always be Ava, and whatever happens to her, she's on her own. Car is car, and she's going to be on her own. So coming to terms with aloneness is the first requirement to healthy relationship. Because if you're using your partner to escape aloneness, you become lonely. And the difference between lonely and aloneness is whether it's an emotional negative, loneliness, or whether it's a psychic strength, being content in your aloneness. Make sense?
And as Leonard Cohen say, then we can be alone together and have a nice time.
So a good part of our issues in life is when loneliness crashes in on our inability to be comfortably alone. And if we're using relationship to escape a loneliness, then it's only a matter of time before that crashes on us, because it's the fact that we're not in relationship to strengthen each other's independence and strength and character, them supporting you and you supporting them, which is alone together. And if that's not the case, then it crashes usually on the factor that they never lived up to your expectations, or you never lived up to their expectations, or the relationship couldn't possibly live up to anybody's expectations because it's not an escape from loneliness. So this is a big part of it.
And there are some good tools for learning how to be alone well, and to be comfortable alone, and not be so lonely alone, and not be driven by loneliness alone. And one of our favorites is meditation, where you kind of sit by yourself and be by yourself. And sometimes you do that in a group, right? But you're all kind of sitting there being by yourselves. And it's pretty amazing how crowded it gets in there. It gets pretty noisy. There's a lot of people we bring with us in terms of our memories and our feelings and our emotions. So even when we're alone, we've got a community with us.
So we're going to introduce over the next 3 talks, over the next 6 weeks, I guess. We're going to introduce some principles and some tools to meet those principles, and then some methodologies for you in practical terms of working in pair bond or close relationships, whether they're pair bond or not. So the first principle that we're introducing tonight is the nature of aloneness. This is principle number 1. Born alone, die alone, fundamentally live alone. So coming to terms with that. There's 2 ways to do that. There's aloneness in the world, which is how you feel it. You go to work, you quit your job, you move to... Anybody from Fernie? No, from somewhere else. So that's very much, you came on your own, or you came for the guy? Came for the girl? No? So there's the aloneness in the world, how you get to where you're going and what you do, your career and so on. And then there's aloneness in your own being. And the first thing we're talking about is aloneness in your own being, right? How to be alone by yourself on the inside. And the tools for that are meditation and therapy. These are the two main tools used to learn how to be alone inside yourself. Meditation being kind of the transcendent tool, and therapy being the practical family conditioning, yada 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 tool. Right?
That's right. So we really want to highlight here that when we talk about being alone, we're not talking about being lonely. We're talking about being really comfortable and really centered and really at peace with your own, being in your own skin and being in your own mind and being in your own heart, right? And then from that place, that's a really nice thing to share with other people, right? Like that's a good feeling to share with other people, and hopefully we're surrounded by other people doing the same. So it's really nice to share that from them, also to receive that from them. So I just wanted to highlight that we're talking about kind of the opposite of loneliness, even if we're talking about being maybe solitary or maybe not solitary, right? So we can be interdependent because and love one another because we're also okay being by ourselves.
So doesn't mean you can't have relationships if you're alone. It just means that if you are alone, okay being alone, then your relationships are going to do much, much, much better than if you aren't. So becoming okay alone is fundamental to good relationships. So there's the inner one, which is meditation and therapy, which we're not going to talk much about for these talks. We're going to talk mostly about being alone in the world. So out there in interaction with jobs, careers, partners, friends, and so on. So the main idea, I suppose, in terms of the relationships is their purpose may not be what we thought they were going to be. We might be using relationship for security, or we might be using relationship for comfort, or we might be using relationship for protection. And we might even be using relationship for a purpose in life. You know, my purpose is to be in relationship, right? And those kinds of reasons for being in a relationship are probably unsustainable. Because if you need it for security, you're not going to find security in another person. Right? The only security you can find is inside yourself. So we start with that. Once you feel secure or protected or comfortable inside yourself, then the vicissitudes, the struggles that are going to be inevitably happen between you and other people, whether they're romantic or just friendships, get a lot easier to manage because you're not expecting them to fulfill some unfulfilled need in yourself, which they fundamentally can't do. So this is a big part of it. So this nature of learning to be content in oneself, both alone and in the world, is a fundamental building block, first principle, for being able to be in healthy relationships that grow and unfold you, and that you can ride through the ups and downs of life. So far, so good.
Okay, so there's some tools for being okay alone, and why are these important? So one reason is that everything, we're going to draw on Buddhist philosophy here, everything is impermanent. Like everything passes away eventually. So that's another reason that nothing else or no one else can fulfill us, because we never know, there's just no way to know what's going to happen, right? So we can enjoy, for example, a relationship while it's happening, but we don't want to be really dependent on it or think it's going to last forever, because we know for sure that it won't, right? Because, you know, death and taxes, we know that is going to happen eventually, so we need to be prepared for that.
Also, we get
in Buddhist philosophy, this is called impermanence.
Also, when we get together, we have an unwritten contract, usually when we make a friendship or a partnership or some kind of relationship dynamic, that things are going to sort of stay the same down the road as when they started. And that's not what life's about. We change. And as we change, they change. And there's nothing guaranteeing regardless of your motivation and intention, that you're going to change in the same ways, at the same time, together in the same fashion. So this nature of impermanence is also change. Everything's always moving, it's always shifting. Even yourself. We would probably argue that if the 5-year-old you showed up in this room and sat down beside you, you wouldn't recognize them as being yourself. You know, you think you do, but you wouldn't recognize them because you've changed so much in so many ways between then and now. You're kind of unrecognizable to yourself. But one of the tricky things the ego does is the ego, what do you call that when you get paid for things in the past that you, retroactive?
Karmic retribution.
Your ego is retroactive. It claims everything that happened before in the now as if you were always like that, right? And also claims anything that's going to happen to you in the future as if you were already that way when you got there. So if you think you're super cool now, you probably thought you were super cool when you're 5. And nobody may else agree with you. But it doesn't change our self-image.
We don't listen to those people.
But what you find out with a partner, is they thought you were super cool for the first week. How many are under 20? Anybody under 20? Under 30? Okay, so you know you were cool for the first week. Anybody over 40? Okay, so you were, so it was cool for a week when you're 40. It was cool for a year when you're 20, right? And gradually your cool time gets shorter.
Your cool lifespan.
Gets
shorter.
So it's impermanent, it's subject to change, and you can't predict it. It's out of your control. So as much as we like to think that relationships are kind of safe or secure, or that our jobs are safe or secure, or the world's safe and secure, it's just completely out of control. And it's out of our control. So we have to be okay with how to manage this.
Okay, so another reason that we need to be okay being kind of sovereign unto ourselves is it has to do with all of those people that we bring with us that I referred to earlier. So if you've ever been in a relationship with someone who's really different from you, or particular from a different culture, sometimes you just have no idea what they're talking about, and you realize that they come from a really different paradigm than you do, right? I lived in Japan for a long time, right? And it's just normal for the women to do all the housework there. And, as a young woman, I was just like, say what? Right? And a Japanese man would be like, what do you mean what? Because for him, that's perfectly normal. So this is an extreme example of how what we bring to relationships is all of our cultural conditioning, right? And that's for our country, that's for our tribe, that's for our family, right? And part of learning to be sovereign unto ourselves, for being comfortable inside of our skins, is also learning to take apart this conditioning so that we don't automatically expect our partners to understand my reality and play by my rules, in a sense, because they've got their own set. And we have to create new rules together. Because honestly, my parents' rules, a lot of them I don't agree with. So I don't just want to go along with that because I was raised that way. But I need to take a step back and sort of choose, right?
Yeah, this brings us to the kind of 2 overarching principles in Buddhist philosophy which get us into trouble, which is, one is conflicting emotions. No surprise. Don't have to be a Buddhist to understand conflicting emotions. And the other is what we call primitive views. And the primitive views are primitive in the sense that they're not well thought out, more than they're belong to some native culture somewhere. So the primitive views are our views about who we are and how we are, and the conflicting emotions are based on those views. So we have a view of how we are and what we should be, and we get all those views about how we are and who we should be and how we should be from our conditioning. And I'm sorry, I'm going to talk mostly to the ladies, so I'll say he's mostly. And he comes in with a whole different set, perhaps, of views about what he should be and how he should be and how a relationship should be and so on. And coming from how many, I assume we all came from nuclear families, right?
Did anybody grow up in a commune? Just curious.
All nuclear families, one mom, one dad. So as children, we don't realize it, but we're taking on the female identity through our experience with our mother, and we're taking on the male identity through the experience with our father. So when we're growing up, we have one person representing all women. And we have one guy representing all men. And we're programmed to live in that dynamic under their rules in a certain way. So when, what's your name, dear? Caitlin. When Caitlin marries, yeah. Cheryl, her view of male and female is going to be not necessarily lined up with Cheryl's view of male and female. Fair enough? They're going to come in with... So, Caitlin is going to expect the male to act in a certain way, representing her dad. She's going to expect herself to act in a certain way, representing the mother's side of it. And assuming Cheryl was male just for a minute, the opposite would be true. So in order to understand how relationships works, we need to understand how we work. Because when we meet the other, they're going to have lots of ideas that it's the reverse. And nobody ever trains you on this. Did you take a relationship course at school? Did they teach that anywhere? Sorry?
It should be taught.
It should be taught, yeah.
Oh, yeah, really.
So you're going to have two big jobs in your life if you're a human being. One is your career, and the second is your relationships. Now, you studied for your career, I assume. You have careers? And you studied that somehow, or you learned about that for some?
Got training.
Experience. I mean, Karen, I don't know, speaking to Karen, somebody we know, where did she go? Oh, there she is. How many years have you studied massage?
3, 4, 5.
How many years have you been practicing?
Almost 20.
Almost 20. And in that time when you've been practicing, did you consciously learn in those 20 years of practicing? Like you made efforts to understand things or get better?
Yes.
Yeah. And how many years did you study relationships? None, yeah. So is it any reason, is it any surprise?
Well, and when we're in a relationship, we're usually trying to fix the other person,
yeah.
right? Because
yeah.
they're the one with all the problems, right?
We know.
15 years doing that.
So we know they're wrong.
Consciously learning in a relationship though?
Sorry?
I feel like I'm consciously learning in a relationship all
Ah,
the time.
well, that's the key element, because if you consciously use relationship to learn and grow, then yes. But it's not something that's taught in school. It's not something, you have to come to that on your own, almost in spite of society. Not that society is saying, I'm sorry, what's your name? Krista? Krista, okay, now here's your relationship course at 5 years old and 10 years old, and here's your one at 15, and here's your one at 20. Okay, now you're an adult in the career. Here's this relationship course. You can do that on your own, but it's not part of the agenda normally. And if you do that, then that's exactly what we're talking about. But for the people for teenagers walking in blind, there's no agenda for that. We have to discover it on our own, which is part of the issue.
And to refer back to what Doug Sensei was saying earlier, we're very keen on community. That's a lot of what we do at our center. And one of the great things about community, as challenging as it is that we've got a variety of role models for how different people approach things, right? So it's not just this binary system, which the nuclear family puts a lot of stress on people. As any parent knows, parents, two people or one person isn't really meant to raise a child. As they say in Africa, it takes a village. And similarly, with everything else, we can learn from a diversity of people like, oh gosh, look how they handle issues in relationship. Oh, that's really interesting. I never thought of that. You add different tribes and cultures to the mix, and it gets to become a very rich resource.
So this is our argument for children being raised communally, that a child should have 5 representations of women and 5 representations of men. So
there are people being raised communally too.
Yeah, so that the young girl and the young boy get to experience 5 different archetypes for a woman, or 6 or 10, or however many, and they get 5 or 6 different archetypes for men. So they don't expect their partners to behave like their mother or fathers, or if you don't like your mother and father, the opposite to your mother or father, which is more complicated than that, obviously. But this is what we talk about the primitive views. The primitive views is in our expectations of what male is, what female is, how it should work together, and how these things should mesh. And if you look back at how many are in second relationships? Or
Second,
third, or
fourth.
fourth? How many are not? How many are in their first relationship? Marriage, yeah, okay. Okay, good for you. Yeah. First marriage? Yeah. So, this learning from expectation and learning from your partner has to be kind of built, right? That you didn't go into it and say the day you met, like, what's your name, dear?
Sharon.
Sharon? Sharon? And your partner's name is? Kent? Ken. So, Sharon didn't go, okay, Ken, here's my list of expectations. These things I'm for. These things I'm against. This is my life vision. These are my plans for the future.
These are the ground rules.
These are the ground rules. This is going to really bug me. This I'm really going to like. Ken, meanwhile, over on his side of the table, has got his list going down. You just probably fell in love, and then you figured out a number of years in that you had to start doing this stuff if you wanted to keep it together, no?
That's what I did.
Yeah. So this is a good argument for teaching young people, children, different examples of what men are, so it's not like just one guy dad, and what different examples of women are, so it's not just one woman mother, but also to kind of give some idea of, as they grow up and as they get more mature, what they're looking for in a relationship.
And I think we want to emphasize too that this takes a burden off of the parents as well. Like, they don't have to be everything to their kids or to their family, right? It's a distributed privilege, right, to be a part of one another's lives.
So if I can use you as an example.
Sure. For what? Go ahead.
Did we put that in the agreement? When before I met Catherine, she had decided to be celibate. Like, not accidental celibacy.
Right. There's a big difference
Intentional.
between ending up being celibate and choosing to be celibate, right? And why is it like night and day? Because it ends up being the same thing. But if you've ever tried it, it's completely different ballgame.
And from a monk's perspective, the reason for celibacy is to examine the nature of the game. Its purpose is to examine how the male, female, and using, or whatever, go with the flow here. How the male-female dialogue works. What's the dynamic between men and women? How are the structures? How is the game played? So people become celibate as monks when they're young in the East for a period of years, and although they're supposed to be meditating and studying Buddha Dharma, they're also learning what it means to be in and out of relationship, because they're not actually engaged in the hunt or the search, right? They're standing back and watching it. So Catherine decided to be celibate for what? 2
Or
years?
the longing, like, there's a natural biological longing for it to be relating to someone. But when you're celibate, you aren't looking for some place for that longing to land on another person, right? So you look at the longing itself, right? And what am I longing for exactly?
So you were celibate for
2.5 years.
2.5 years. And then she made a list. She said, this is what I want in a relationship. This is what I want.
Okay, may I?
What's your life?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I realized being celibate, and I was 28 at that time, 29, and I realized that I had this kind of image of a partner that I wanted. And I realized I had never actually thought about what qualities I wanted this person to have. I just kind of wanted them to be great. And that was it, right? Yeah, I just wanted them to be amazing. But I didn't know what that really meant, right? And I was just flabbergasted. I was like, I'm 28, and I have invested, at that point I'd invested a lot of energy into relationships and looking for relationships, wanting to be in relationships without actually knowing what I wanted or what I was looking for or what I really, admired and respected and needed from that prospective partner. And I was really astonished to discover that about myself, and it took me deciding I'm not going to be in a relationship to to even see that.
Yeah. And we
You were
do that.
midstream. You were midstream.
That's all right. And we do that for our career, right? We think, well, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a nurse, I'm going to be an artist, I'm going to be a dancer.
These are my goals.
These are my goals. This is what I want to do. This I want to shape it. It may change with time. It probably will, right? But you've kind of put some thought behind it, and you put
business
some
plan.
business plan. Hopefully, a business plan. You put some focus behind it in terms of how that might play out, and you have to adapt and change as conditions change. But we hardly ever do that with relationship. We tend to like fall in love, right? Which means the key aspect of falling in love is really amazing. It's really an interesting dynamic. The guy we choose has exactly those qualities to make us feel super special, right?
Or girl. No.
Well,
We're all flexible.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, sure. And he has exactly those qualities to push every button you've got. And he's the only guy you know who can do both at the same time.
Yeah, like simultaneously.
He can make you feel like you're loved beyond anything you ever imagined, and he pushes every button you've got. And that's who you marry. And so the reason, or that's who you get together with for however long, depending on conditions. But that's the key to the conflicting emotions and the primitive views. The views that we're trying to conquer are the buttons that we get pushed, right? Those are the views that we're trying to change. And the conflicting emotions is we don't know what the buttons are to get pushed until they're pushed.
And then we go into conflicting.
And then we go into what?
And then we go into conflicting emotions.
And then we go into conflicting.
I love you. Why are you pushing my buttons?
And all of this is built on one huge mountain of self-image. And our self-image, we don't know how we got our self-image because we weren't conscious of self when our self-image was built. So by the time
it was built when we were children.
we were very young, we're 2. So before 2, you don't have a self, which is why you can't remember much before 2.
Can you give an example of primitive views so that we have an idea that everybody knows what we're talking about?
Okay.
So going back to the example I gave before, a primitive view would be like my Japanese friends, that women did all the housework, for example.
Right.
And to be fair, a kind of partner primitive view would be, and men's job is to make all the money and support the female materially.
Yeah, this is a huge subject, this primitive view thing, because none of us think we're primitive. We all think we're really, really cool and mature, and it's only down the road later that those people were kind of uncool. So I think my favorite example is Elvis Presley. I know he's a little old for most of you, but you know, when Elvis Presley started to wiggle his hips, right, all heck broke loose, right? It was like, and I'm sure all the people who think now that Elvis Presley was super cool for the time, back in the Middle Ages, back there, thought he was really immoral for that, right? The primitive view was doing that is immoral.
Wait, what happened? Did the show get pulled off the air?
Yeah, they busted him for
Did
something.
he go to jail?
I don't know whether he went to jail, but he got busted. But I'm sure now that you think, oh yeah, well that's cool. Elvis Presley was kind of cool. I mean, even if you don't like Elvis Presley, you get the idea, right? Well, that's cool. But at the time, it wasn't cool. So the thing about it is that whatever primitive views we have now, we don't know we have them. We just know we don't like it. And in 5 years or 10 years from now, when we decide, oh, it's not so bad, we'll pretend. I'm not, no blame, right? I do too. We'll pretend that we were like that all along. So a good, maybe more modern example is homosexuality, where I think it was illegal. You went to jail for homosexuality when I was a young man until Trudeau came along in 1967, I think.
73.
73, thank you. 1973, he took it off the criminal books. Well, there are a whole lot of people who still today think it's like really primitive, like it's bad, right? So that's
especially done in different cultures.
and in different cultures.
Right.
So that's an example of primitive view. Now, you don't know where you got that view from. This is I'm using more of the example to show the point than the example's the example's not very good. point is you hold that primitive view from your conditioning. And so the point of view of working through healthy relationship is you got to work through a lot of primitive views you don't even know you have. And what happens in a close relationship is those primitive views, sooner or later, are going to get put on the table. If they're really threatening to your identity, you're not going to want to look at them. And if they're not so threatening, you will. But where you're going to run into troubles is the primitive view, and then the conflicting emotion that arises because of that view. So we come back to meditation again and say, well, the purpose of meditation and therapy is deciding for yourself whether this is a view I want to hold, whether or not this is a view that I'm going to have emotions about, or whether or not I can let that view go. And what happens in relationships is those things become central to your life together, whether you ever intended to do it or not. And kind of Catherine's list of what she wanted, most people don't have a list of what they're going to do.
Which things become central to your life together?
The primitive views.
See those things?
The views you hold that you haven't identified, you haven't named, and you haven't addressed. And eventually they're going to become very central to your relationship.
Can you think of an example?
Money.
Oh, like primitive views about money.
Yeah, he thinks you should just go spend it and have fun, and you think no, you gotta, he wants to buy a new golf club and you want to buy a new fridge.
Money's an important one because money is a symbol for survival, right? That's why it's such a kind of gets to be such a hot issue. It's because it triggers our belief in our ability to survive, or fears around that.
And this kind of triggers another point, because the ego is built in the lower three chakras, the root chakra, the sexual energy chakra, and the belly button hara chakra. And relationship. And so the next place you're going to have a lot of primitive. So the money is survival, like Catherine just said. Then the next chakra is about sexuality. What's on or not on the table? Like, I will do this, I won't do this. This is good, this isn't good. Right?
Why or why not?
Yeah. And the third chakra is about power. Who's in control? And if you feel out of control, you're going to be in primitive views and conflicting emotions. And if he's in primitive, if he has in a primitive view, he's going to be, or if he has a control issue, feels out of control, he's going to be working with a primitive view and a conflicting emotion. Fair enough? So this, because the ego lives in these three chakras, you need to learn how to get into the next chakras, right? In order to meet the issues.
So we like to say that this model, this human organism, comes with the first three chakras. Like we start out here, right? And then we need to choose to move into the upper ones, right? And in order to do that, we need to have some health in the lower three. So, and when we talk about, like, they don't get, they're never perfect, but there's a fluidity. Like, oh, my survival issues are being triggered, and I'm okay. I know that I can make a living in the world, and I don't need to be in a panic because this job fell through, right? That would be an example. And the second one, with sexuality, sort of like, oh, that's kind of weird. Why do I think that's weird? Yeah, what is it about that makes me think it's weird? Because other people seem to think that's perfectly normal. Like, it doesn't mean we need to do anything or not do anything, but there's a kind of a sense of openness or fluidity or curiosity involved with all these. And same with power. We're not like in power all the time, but we're willing to explore the dynamic and move in and out of different relationships with power, with other people. So let's take a moment. We've covered a lot of territory, and we're using a lot of terms and concepts that are familiar to us, but I don't know if they're familiar to everybody here. So are there any questions or that so far?
Okay.
And you're welcome to ask them.
If you got any or comments, questions, just wave at us. So this comes down.
You can wave at us anyway.
You can wave anyway. So this brings us back down to, okay, well, how is it built? How is it built? How is it built? And as Buddhist meditators and practitioners, this is our whole life study. How is it shaped? How is it built? How is it put together? How does it interact? How does it work together? Do I understand it? If not, I'm going to be in some power issue problem because I don't understand it. So I'm going to have a power issue about that. Or I do understand it. Why do I like it? Why do I not like it? So as a Buddhist practitioners or spiritual seekers or whatever you want to call us, this is kind of our raison d'etre. So
this is why, may I?
Yeah.
This is why meditation is so great, because all of the same issues, just all of our stuff is kind of in a constant state of cycling through, right? And today one thing is up, and tomorrow it's gone, and something else is up, right? But usually on a regular day, I'm so busy doing other things that I may or may not be aware of what's coming up, right? Or I might see it, but I've got a deadline to meet, and so I'm not going to give it my attention right now. So with meditation, and in the city, there's so much stimulus. In like a big city, there's so much stimulus that it's hard to perceive the things that are coming up. So that's why when we're in meditation, it's such an amazing opportunity, because this stuff comes up and it's like, whoa, where did this come from? And it's very normal. It's often about other people. It's often about memories. And at some point we're like, but wait a minute, I'm here by myself. Why am I having this conversation with my 5th grade teacher 40 years later? Like, what's going on with this? We had one friend and student said she was at a meditation retreat and standing at the window looking outside hoping that someone would come and rescue her, right? And she's like, wait a minute, I chose to come here. I planned months in advance because I wanted to be here, and I paid money. Why am I waiting for somebody to come and take me away, right? But that's being able to see that. You need that space, and you need that sort of being by yourself to be able to engage in those conversations and those discoveries.
So we're talking, yeah, meditation drives you crazy. But anyway, except actually, as we had a dialogue in Japan, and a guy who made rosaries, malas. I wanted my mala fixed, and I asked him to do it a certain way, and he wanted to do it a different way because he's Japanese. I said, no, I prefer it this way. Anyway, long story short, he said...
Since they wanted a half mala, so it could fit in his pocket, so he could save them in his pocket. Right. And the guy's like, no, we don't do that.
Anyway, so he said, well, finally, he makes malas, right, for meditation. And he goes, well, meditation drives you crazy. And I said, well, that's your view. My view is that everybody's already crazy, and meditation just makes you aware of it. Different point of view. The thing about it is, in a way, we talked a bit earlier about the 3 ego chakras, right? The first 3, and the one that most of us move from first is power, control. Everybody wants to feel like they're in control of their life. That's the ego's job, to be in control of your life. And if that gets threatened, then the conflicting emotions and that primitive views kick in, right? Regardless of whether you are threatened or not, you feel you are. Right? And if you feel you are, then you are. So you can fight the power battle in relationships forever, and any time that button gets triggered, you're going to go into that reaction. But that's not resolving anything for you. That's just going in the loop. So in order to come to terms with control, you're probably going to have to come to terms with what's below it? Sexuality. And what's below that? Survival. So these things come down to the survival thing. And the survival thing starts when you first realize that you're separate from mother. And that happens around 2. So at 2 years age, around 2 years of age, your consciousness finally can look in the mirror and point to itself and say, Doug or whatever, me. And then you're separate from mother. And this makes you furious. absolutely furious. Not because mother's abandoned you, because you've realized that mother's not under your control.
Was that what the terrible two are?
That's exactly what the terrible two are.
Really? Nobody
Yeah.
told us that.
I know. My mother said I was a perfect baby until I was 2. There you
Tell
go.
her why.
Yeah. Because I realized she wasn't under my control. I'd cry and she'd come. And then I'd cry and she didn't come. And go, what's wrong with her? And then I'd cry and it goes, oh, she's not me. She's her own person. What is the witch doing? She's supposed to be here taking care of this. So this separation is your second major trauma in life. And you're going to have lots of them. Well, not lots of them. Most people have 5 or 6 major traumas in their life. You're not going to avoid them. The first one was birth, and the second one is 2. Or
realizing that you and
The second one is 2.
I know it's unfair, which is why we learn to shut down, because we learn to protect. We get this ego thing, me. We get this ego thing, and then we hold on to this for dear life because we don't want to feel the separation, the loss of union with the totality of the universe, represented by mother. And we don't want to go through the near-death experience of the third stage of the womb, which is from contractions through to
going through the birth canal.
crowning,
Right.
which is
So
deadly.
that's the first trauma because it's so physically, and the baby doesn't know that it's going to come out.
Has no proof.
Right? It does. There's no light at the end of the tunnel for the baby. They're just going through this intense physical experience without knowing what's going to happen next. Right? So that's why we say birth is the first trauma. And you can imagine going from the womb to especially nothing against hospitals, but bright lights and
Masks.
rubber gloves, right? So that's the first, and then as Sensei said, the second is the realizing we're separate from mother. So she's not under our control. We're extremely vulnerable. If she's not under our control, we could easily die, right? Because we don't know if she's going to come when we cry, and then that triggers all the control issues.
This is a.
She had a question.
Okay, this is an organismic understanding. The organism knows that it's not. It doesn't know intellect. The mother knows intellectually. Okay, I'm going to have a baby, and there's dying. She's got a rational mind to figure it out.
And I'm going to take care of it.
Yeah, the baby has no
best.
idea. It's like just stark terror in the face of the journey. So when we come to terms with relationship, we have to come to terms with separation, because whenever our partner triggers intentionally or unintentionally the separation abandonment issue, we go right into primitive organismic reaction. And there are
Feeling like we're that baby.
There are 4 fears. These are called the 4 foundational fears of the psyche of the ego. There are 4 fears that are attached to that separation. But I'll answer that after whoever had the question.
Well, it was just a question about what about the children that don't have the first journey through the canal?
You mean
cesareans?
cesareans?
Cesarean, yeah, that's a good question.
Their experiences that. Did you want
I
to?
feel like that would be more of a surprise, because at least with birth and labor, like the child can feel the contractions, so they know that something's happening. Whereas with cesarean, it's just
no trauma though.
you just get pulled right out of the belly. Do you know what
Well,
I mean?
I
yeah,
think
sure.
there's the trauma of the shock, right? You go from that womb experience to this completely different environment with no manual, no explanation, right? And there's also cesareans. That's a journey that babies go through together with the mother, a journey of survival and kind of breakthrough. And then cesareans don't have that. There's somebody came in and got me, right? So that's often a psychological pattern that people with cesarean birth may experience later in life. That somebody will come and help me out of this situation.
So I'm going to. I'm sorry, your name again. Caitlin.
Caitlin.
I'm going to sort of contradict you, Caitlin. From the point of view of the mother, she goes, yeah, these are contractions. I go through them. She's got an intellect. She knows the story. She mostly. But from the point of view of the infant, which you can experience directly in meditation, it's life and death, and you have no idea. It's
But
like
feel
I might die. I have no idea whether I'm going to survive or not. You feel like you're dying.
if I may,
Yeah.
I feel like there's a connection between mother and child.
Oh, there is.
And that, like, there's love from the mother when she's, depending on the relationship,
Yeah.
and, like, how the mother became pregnant or whatever.
Yes.
But I feel like there's a relationship between mother and child.
Oh,
and
there-
feeling is exchanged. So when the mother goes into labor, there's a feeling of acceptance.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
I
they
think-
know that this is happening, it's coming, where
I think I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. From the mother and the adult's position, I agree with you completely. From the infant's position, there's no such knowledge. There's no intellectual understanding of the process.
not intellectual but emotional.
There's no emotion.
I think there's degrees.
There's feeling.
I think there's
Feelings and
degrees where I think some people do an amazing job of having a very healthy birth process that is as supportive as possible for the infant, right? And they're still stuck in a really small space and getting squeezed, and may have feelings of love throughout that, which is what helps them get through it, right? But it still must be very disorienting and very frightening because it's so different from the previous 9 months.
Let's take it from another perspective. From the perspective of the child, they do not know whether they're going to survive or die. They have no idea. So when you're in that experience meditatively, you think you're going to die. You really do think you're going to die. And there may be the universe, because I agree with you at a bigger place, that at the universal place, the place of totality, there is nothing but love. But the concept of love, right? The understanding of love as something you can name or experience only happens after you're old enough to name it. So the organism is in a state of love. The organism itself is in a state of love. But it doesn't change the terror of the organism's survival because it doesn't know whether it's going to survive, love or not.
Well, does the baby know what terror is, though?
I'm sorry?
Does the baby know what terror is?
What is?
Terror.
Yeah.
It's organistic, intense experience. And if you're drowning, you don't need an ego to know you're drowning, right? If you're drowning, the organism fights to survive and has no idea whether it's going to survive or not. The ego's out of the way in that case, and that's the same in birth. The system is fighting to live. That's all it knows.
I understand.
But anyway, coming back to, I'm sorry,
Krista?
Christo's point. In a cesarean, the problem is as an adult, is that whenever you get to anything difficult, you tend to give up. What happens is because the third stage of the womb, from when the contractions start to when you crown, right? That's where you learn to fight for things. That's where you learn to get through it. Determination. Okay, I got to do this. I got to get this done, right? Because the whole organism is saying, do this, right? So that you learn that in third stage. Cesarean births, you kind of popped out. So a lot of kids, you can compensate for this by life's later lessons and therapy and yada yada. But for the infant who's popped out through cesarean, they have a tendency as adults to give up when things get difficult. They're fine, and then things get really difficult, and they kind of go, okay, where's the... Yeah, exactly. Where's the pop out?
We do, back to Caitlin's point, we do some retreats working with the womb experience and the birth experience. So Doug Sensei was born blue with the cord around his neck, and I was induced, right? And we've both done a lot of work on, so what does that mean for a person, and for that birth process. And I really tried to talk everybody out of induction. That's not something I would wish on a being, and it's not malintended, but I feel like I still have to work hard to compensate for the fact that I was induced, right? Which just means you were pushed out before your time.
You were induced, your mother was induced.
Yeah, that's
for your
right.
birth.
Yeah, that's right. So
So-
that's
So
an
you weren't
example.
Sorry?
You weren't ready to be home.
No, she wasn't.
I was not ready. Yeah.
So this is very interesting because we're talking about freedom, actually.
So sorry.
Oh.
Totally. Like loving parents, safe environment. My mother said like, oh yeah, you were a really easy birth. Like it was over, not stressful at all for her and presumably not for me. But I'm like,
Be careful.
yeah, don't induce, please.
Yeah, this is kind of where the subtleties get kind of interesting because, for instance, in Catherine's case, when it's time to go somewhere or do something, she slows down.
No.
Yeah, from the induction because she's not quite ready. So as her partner, if I'm not practicing kind of some sort of awareness or understanding or whatever we want to call this talk we're doing, right, attempting to understand how things work, I would just get pissed off. Well, come on, what are you doing? It's like you're now arranging the China, if we had China, right? You're arranging, we're about to go to this, to get to this thing.
And not even. It's like I'm almost ready. I just have to take one more sip of water. It's just I just never feel ready. Dating back to that.
This is
Right,
funny.
so it takes it, and we joke about it, and we both know it, and so on. But it's still there. It's just
This
in the organism.
Yeah, this is hilarious. We go to a restaurant, right? We're finished the meal, we paid the bill. I say, okay, so you ready to go? And she goes, almost. And she's got this much water left in her glass.
Yeah.
And in the time it
Sure.
takes me to ask her if she's ready to go, she drinks the water and she's ready to go. But no, she says,
But
"Oh, I
if
just
he
gotta
asks
drink this water."
me if I'm ready, that answer is no.
So let's imagine for a minute that you're just a guy with this woman who's never ready to go anywhere. Normal guy, normal woman. There could be some fights about this, yeah? This is why we feel that self-knowledge and understanding of the patterns are really, really huge.
So this is an example of the conditioning that we bring to a relationship, right? And it's not like when we get together, you sort of say like, "And are you the kind of person who is ready?" Right? Yeah, exactly,
Is that a
right.
question on your first date?
Right.
Yes.
So it takes years and it takes self-exploration. Because we do these retreats on birthing, I asked my mother what my birth was like, and so I didn't know until I was in my early 30s that I was induced, right? And I was like, oh my God, that explains a lot, right? But it's also, that's our culture nowadays, not everybody necessarily talks about that.
So let's flip the coin, if we can. I was born blue, with the cord wrapped around my neck, right? And so I've always had this tendency to be quick, like get it out, get it off, get it out, get it off, get it out, get it off. So you can see the dynamic. Okay, let's go.
And you can see, like,
Water.
we're kind of made for each other and, torture each other at the same time, which is what we do with our partners.
Yeah.
That's our job, right?
The purpose of a relationship is to reveal the torture you're already experiencing because you're dwelling in unseen patterns, but there's enough love, respect, and dedication there to work through it, because if you don't do it with Bob, you're going to have to do it with Bill. And if you don't do it with Bill, you're going to have to do it with Joe. And if you don't do it with Joe, you're going to... My brother was married 5 times. And I asked him once in his 4th marriage, I said, so what's your problem? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you've had 4 wives and it's not worked, so what are you not learning? And he turned to me and said, well, they just weren't the right women. Just, right? And I'm not picking on my brother, I'm not picking on anyone. This is what the ego does. The ego says, not my problem. Say hi to yourself.
So I'm really glad this example came up, because
Yeah.
this is a perfect example. So an induction is kind of a physical level phenomenon, but it belies a family conditioning, right? My family believed that it was fine to induce their children, right? And I don't want to lay anything on my parents, but or my other family members, but when my brother and my sister had children, I was like, so how about natural birth, right? But they're part of that conditioning too. So they also induce their children, right? And I'm trying to raise alternatives without being, a jerk or kind of forcing or, giving them the idea they're doing anything wrong. I don't want to do that, but do want to present alternatives to the conditioning that is blindly in play.
So in my case, born with the cord around my neck, whenever anything gets into a choking kind of situation, I would kind of get really upset, right? Wrestling with your buddy, or wrestling with your friend, or playing football. I played high school football. Playing football, and you get choked or something, and this sort of panic thing would move in. And it wasn't until I became a meditator that so I'm sitting here in meditation, and all of a sudden I'm feeling choked, like I'm going to strangle. So what's your natural response as a person? Sorry?
I said fight or flight.
Yeah, get the fuck out of here. Get in the car. I'm out of here. Screw meditation. I'm never going to do that again. Too scary. But if you sit through it,
because it's stressful.
It's stressful. So if you sit through it, the trauma unlocks. It just unlocks. All the little keys kind of go click, 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 click. And so since that time, that problem, even when I'm being choked for fun, some people want to choke me more often. But leaving that aside, it's once that doesn't trigger that response anymore. So this is key in relationship, because you have had a couple of traumas. You're going to have a few more, and how you meet them and how you navigate them in relationship really can help you grow and unfold much faster than even on your own, because of that dynamic. So I got to return for a minute to cover the foundation, the four fears. The four fears, based on separation and the fear of ego death, are the fear of being abandoned, which we all have, the fear of being annihilated, wiped out, which is what we feel when we don't feel we have power, the fear of going insane, that where is that coming from, right? And the fear of being evil, that if I was to rest into my natural state, who knows what I do? So I need to have all these control mechanisms built around my ego, lest I destroy the entire planet and everybody on it because I'm having my period.
Sometimes that manifests as, for example, it can manifest in all sorts of ways, but a couple of examples that come to mind is somebody who maybe doesn't want to have a drink because they're afraid what they might do, right? Or another one is sometimes fear of being evil manifests as fear of being a bad person. Like, but if I do that, that means I'm a bad person.
So like if you were a guy, and you're a young man, and you're not attracted to women, and and you think you're a homosexual or something, and the Bible or your parents have told you it's evil. It's like imagine the hurdle that they got across to meet that one.
Or no role models.
Or no role models. It was against the law. You were in the closet.
So an interesting thing about these four fears and the birth process is that people make a lot of money off of these. Every horror movie just basically runs through all of these fears and the birth process, including penises and vaginas with teeth or attacking you. Right?
So if you look at all your horror movies, they're
also,
penises and vaginas.
Like Disneyland amusement park rides also.
Yeah. Penises
sort
and
of like
vaginas.
whoosh through the tunnel.
Yeah.
And it's kind of exciting,
Aliens.
but actually it's really terrifying, right? Or getting into a really small space.
Every mother gave birth probably thinks she's got an alien in there. Get out!
Yeah, so it's kind of more fun to watch horror movies from this perspective.
Horror movies become entertaining. Now you're gonna that's the womb. That's the fear of being smothered. That's the fear of being castrated. That's the fear of being eaten alive. These are womb fears, right? Fear of drowning. The fear of falling. The fear of being burned. The fear of being eaten up. These are all the fears that the organism goes through organismically in the womb experience, And most of them are in that third stage,
Going through the
birth canal. So that's that's all those horror movies are just about womb fears. And if you've cleared the womb, then horror movies are kind of fun. and pornography also triggers a lot of those fears about sexual power and sexual control. So yes.
I just on the alienation piece, for a child that is born and dies in birth and then dies, and then that soul, the next time they come back, would still have a resonance of that experience for sure, right?
Yeah.
So even if the second birth or the next birth that they had was the positive one, that was, things were quite normal, they would still have a resonance from that birth before.
Yeah. There's this book called Biogenealogy out there. I forget who wrote it, but it talks about the being born into families over and over again through cycles.
The same family?
Or, cousins, same family structure. The acorn doesn't fall far from the tree idea. But from a Buddhist philosophy point of view, the consciousness that dies in utero or in the fetus will have a very short lifespan in its next birth. Because it's the way they figure this is that you get a certain bank account. You get 80 years, say. So if you die at 79, your next lifespan is only a year, because you have to balance the equation, and then the next lifetime after that, you're back to a full cycle. That's their view about it.
The nice thing about these is that we've all been through pretty much everything, right? So we've all died in all different kinds of ways and had all different kinds of experiences, and sometimes those experiences just kind of pass through the organism in kind of rapid fire.
Yeah, to just kind of emphasize.
To kind of clear the energy.
Yeah, to emphasize this point in Buddhist philosophy, every lifetime that's ever been lived is yours. The idea of a separate ego is just built on you thinking you're a separate ego. But from the point of view of the totality of consciousness, you have been every being that's ever lived. You are every being that is living now, and you're every being that's going to be born in the future. You are the totality of all things. And the ego is just blinders. This is my life. So when it comes to meditation, you can have experiences of egos that aren't yours, that don't seem to be yours, that other lifetimes, other kinds of experience, different genders, different bodies, even different creatures. Right? So when it comes to a cesarean, or when it comes to an early death, or a tragic death, or a traumatic birth, you have a million normal births. You have a billion normal lifetimes to compensate for the one that got weird. So even though you might have had a weird birth this time, you've had millions of births that were ordinary.
Went better.
Went better. So when it comes to relationship, you have to recognize the reason you're in relationship is fundamentally to realize you're not you.
Can you say that again?
The fundamental purpose of a relationship is to recognize you're not you. And you don't have to be afraid of them or fight against them or before them or anything else, because they're not them either. That what you're learning is that we are all one consciousness, occupying different bodies with different perspectives. And the relationship is there to teach you, oh, we really are one consciousness, we really are one body, and when we're feeling good about each other, we believe it.
And it's easy. When we're feeling good, it's easy and wonderful. And when we're not feeling so good, that's where it gets a bit more challenging.
So the purpose of a relationship, pair bonding, is so that every male in the world becomes your husband, and every female in the world becomes your wife. And not only that, but you become every male in the universe, and you become every female in the universe, and you don't get trapped in this ego construction that is built precisely for you to learn that point. So putting
kind
it
of empathy to the infinite power.
Yeah. the way to see this is we don't know who discovered water, but we know it was not a fish. It may be a dolphin or a turtle. You got to get out of it to know what you're in. So the ego is built to show us that we are in union with the universe. But the only way to know you're in union with the universe, is to not be in union with the universe, which is the role of the ego. The ego says you're separate, you're alone, yada, 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 right? And when you see through the mirror of the ego to the totality of the universe, then you never feel separate or isolated or in conflict with anybody ever again. It's only about language.
So it's worth saying that the ego has a really important job, which is to navigate, to make decisions, to have discernment, right? And that's why the ego comes into place. That's things about likes and dislikes, like wrong and right, all those shapings that we get as we grow up. Right? And as we said earlier, we get older, we meet different kinds of people, we have different kinds of experience, and we kind of take another look at those things and maybe like, oh, hang on, I was raised to believe this, and actually I don't think that holds water. And we develop maybe a different view that we think is better, right? So that's when our ego starts to get a little bit more flexible. And then what Sensei's talking about is the ultimate flexibility is when we have this unitive experience, right? The ego's still there, it's still serving an important function, but it's not calling all the shots. It's not like trying to stay in charge of the experience, right? And not trying to control everybody else.
And this is where we come full around back to Caitlin's point, which is the universe is love.
Mm-hmm.
The total experience of the universe is love, right? The total connection of everybody in the universe is love. Makes no separation or distinction based on even creatures, species, because that's our last ism, maybe, speciesism. But when it shows up in ego form, then there's all these dialogues and patternings that we need to see through in order to return to where we started. And that's called, in Buddhism, that's called awakening. Anyway, there's some thoughts. How long are we supposed to be talking, Karen? Sorry?
9.
9? Okay.
Right?
Any questions or debates on these points? There's a lot of stuff here, so. Caitlin, got a debate?
I had something earlier, but I felt it was rude to say something, and then I forgot.
Well, if it comes
If
back,
you
jump in.
think of it, yeah, you can bring it up again. Should we talk about fusion?
Not-
We talked about
Let's hang on that just for a sec. Yeah, Marty.
You mentioned we're all going to go through 5 or 6 individual traumas in our life. You mentioned 2. Could
Yeah.
you mention some others?
Divorce, early death of a loved one,
injury, serious injury,
death of a baby,
accidents,
death of a parent if you're really close to them,
illness.
bankruptcy, cancer. Do you want to go on?
Just garden variety
Garden variety.
stuff that we all, it's just inevitable that some of this is going to happen.
The feeling
to
of being
us.
betrayed.
And it's just not possible to avoid all of those, right?
No. Unreliable partner, or whatever that means. Kind of. There's no really unreliable partner, by the way.
Is it betrayal?
No, not really, because you haven't examined who you got together with in the first place. Mm-hmm. The betrayal isn't. They haven't betrayed their nature. You just weren't looking.
Or asking the question.
Or asking the questions. And they may have been lying. But the ego, come on, huh? We're all lying through our teeth all the time. It's what the ego does. We're lying to we're kind of manipulating and controlling to get what we want, right? We're not saying, well, I am now manipulating you, Ava, in order to get me a cup of coffee. Oh, Ava, you're so beautiful, you're so kind, you're so generous. Would you get me a cup of coffee? But that's a basically lie, right? Or I say, Ava, go get me a coffee, right? Which is kind of like if that works. So which one do we use?
The one that works.
Whichever one works.
Mm-hmm.
And if we had manipulative parents, we'd probably turn into controllers. And if we had controlling parents, we probably turn into manipulators.
And it depends what our siblings did, right? Because the slots get taken up.
That's true.
Right?
That's
If they're
true.
charming, I've got to find another
Yeah.
strategy.
So my sister, being the oldest, was the boss. She bossed everybody around. And my brother, being the middle child, was sort of the forgotten child. So he kind of just disappeared. Like, Bill, are you there? What? And I was the youngest, the baby, so I was the charmer. I was the kind of, sorry? The manipulator, yeah, exactly. Because that's how youngest survive, and that's all. So how many oldest children? You tend to run things?
Absolutely.
How many middle children? You tend to get left middle? You kind of feel like you're a little unseen sometimes. How many youngest children? Charmers? Are you the charmers? David?
Am I?
Okay, so just by way of understanding how to be alone in the world and how to be alone on your own. So to be alone on your own, we recommend meditation. To learn how to be alone in the
therapy.
And therapy, and to learn to be alone in the world, we recommend therapy. And then the tools that we're going to talk about in the next couple of weeks are mostly tools for how to be in the world. Yeah.
When you say therapy, what are you referring to? Just
Anything.
Oh yeah, that's a great question.
Bodywork.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We mean that as a really broad umbrella.
Sorry?
Just everything.
Just everything.
Yeah, like
What are your favorite?
co-counseling, reevaluative counseling, just reading about psychology, being in circles.
I think.
I said being in workshops like this.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Whatever works, basically.
What did
Being
you say?
in workshops.
Being in workshop, yeah, or reading. I mean, my favorite Freudian, for instance, is actually a woman named Horny.
She's a student of Jung?
She was a student of Freud.
Student of Freud.
Karen Horney. She's better than Freud. She's better than Freud. She's better on Freud than Freud is on Freud. So I recommend Karen Horney for your Freudian approach. I recommend Carl Jung for your transpersonal approach. I recommend Lowen for body and real. What's it, Rilke? No. Reich. William Reich for body awareness stuff. But I think if you
And I really recommend with spending as much time as possible with other people who are asking the questions and inquiring and
yeah,
looking.
really, that's the number
Is
one.
that, and that's the relationship aspect, right? Because then our ability to see things and to discover just increases dramatically without that amount of effort on our own, because we're doing it together.
And for this,
It's like a groundswell.
yeah, and for this, yes, and for definitely be around people who are waking up, or trying to. And from the modern approach, Mark Epstein, who's living now and teaching now, is really good. And
Thoughts Without a Thinker.
Thoughts Without a Thinker, great book. And what's his teacher's name? Not Wittgenstein. Anyway, so if you read Mark Epstein, he'll talk about his relationship with his teacher, Winnicott. Thank you very much.
Oh, nice.
Nice pull. A guy named Winnicott, who is the whole guy who studied all this baby stuff. And WINNICOT.
Yeah.
Anyway, just so you know, none of this is original. Very little of this is original.
There's a question.
Oh, where?
I was just wondering if you knew of a good psychotherapist or somebody in Cranbrook. I find that we don't have anyone here in Fernie. Not very many counselors.
No.
Have you heard of François Mead? I'll give you
Francis. Oh yeah, no, I know Francis. I've been treated by him. He's not a counselor.
You don't think so? I found him.
Well, he's a homeopather.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's lovely, and I've been treated.
I've seen him too.
Yeah.
Nice
I
guy,
miss
like
him.
and he's, I know.
And
Other than
you're
him, no.
all
we don't.
invited out to Clear Sky, because this is what we do all the time.
Mhm.
We're not officially counselors, but that's pretty much what we do.
Well, Marie is.
That's right.
I see you guys for therapy. You're probably the best therapists I've been to. So.
Maureen is the therapy for sure. Thank you. Sorry, Marie.
And where does Marie work at?
She's
We can talk
Sorry.
after if you want to share it with us. Yeah.
I mean, the ultimate therapy is learning who you are. That brings you to meditation for the inner part and studying patterns for the outer part. So that's what we've spent our lives doing. Me for 40 years, Catherine for
Yeah,
30.
I think we see them as kind of
co.
right leg, left leg,
Yeah.
like they're both indispensable, and one without the other is a little bit lopsided. So meditation's incredible, but without therapy, you can still miss a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And therapy is amazing, but without meditation,
It's all about me.
can only go so far.
Therapy can only.
And together, they're phenomenal.
Yeah, therapy can traditional therapy can only take you as far as the ego. Meditation takes you past the ego, in both directions, pre-birth and post-death. Anybody else got
So we've talked a lot about the the overarching, the overview, the overarching principles, the kind of context that relationships arise in. And in the next couple classes, as Sensei said, we'll talk about some practical tools when we're in relationship and stuff is coming up. How do we work with that, and how do we use it as grist for the mill to come to a better place?
And if you can't make it next 2 weeks from now?
27th.
If you can't make it 2 weeks from now, the number one, probably from my point of view, the number one key to good relationships, you would like to know it? Yeah, stand back and laugh. Get a perspective, stand back and say, wow, like we're really getting our shorts in a knot over not very much really, except my ego. So let go of my ego.
Quick to forgive and quick to say you're sorry.
I'm sorry,
Quick
Ken.
quick to forgive and quick to say you're sorry.
Yeah, I would sometimes argue against that one because you can't forgive, in my opinion, you can't forgive until you're ready to kill. You got to recognize you're ready to kill them. Then you can forgive them. But if you try to forgive them before you own your hurt and the pain, then it gets paved over and becomes kindness. So I agree with you in essence, but I think a lot of people try to avoid the hurt and the pain by the forgiveness so they don't have to feel the hurt and the pain. And that hurt and pain is what grows you, unfortunately, as a person. It makes you a better person. So in the end, I agree.
That's the fundamental truth, what you're saying, and there's some steps to get there. I was raised as a Catholic, and there's so much about forgiveness there, and I was so quick to forgive that there would still be all this stuff that we hadn't really worked through. Okay, I forgive you, because I really wanted to, right?
Yeah.
And on one level,
Universe is love.
I had, but the issues that I was forgiving about still hadn't been dealt with. Right?
This is-
so that's an example of I wasn't really aware of what my conditioning, my Catholic conditioning was, how it was playing out in my life. So that's why it's so important that we look at our conditioning.
Yeah, this is a very key point that if we want to grow as people, we have to come to terms with the shadow. That's Jung's word for the subconscious, and that stuff that gets hurt, that which needs to forgive or would want to forgive, has to first be seen in its core manifestation before it can go to forgiveness of somebody else's action.
And so what would the core manifestation be?
Terror, hurt, separation, abandonment,
Those
annihilation,
fundamental fears.
betrayal, all those things.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that phrase one more time?
I'm sorry, could you speak up?
Repeat your phrase that you just said. Something about the shadow.
Oh, if one wants to grow as a person, one has to liberate the energies in the shadow, not spiritually bypass them, to just go to
The good resolution.
the good resolution, which we want and we're aiming for, but we got to meet that shadow first. And that shadow holds itself in place fundamentally on the hurt of separation, the hurt of being alone, or you thought you weren't alone and now you really feel alone, and you get angry or upset.
And we'll be talking more about the shadow in the next few classes too. And we love the shadow because it feels kind of yucky. It's got all this kind of inconvenient, painful stuff in there. But it's really when the alchemists transformed lead to gold, that's what they were doing. They were taking all this yucky stuff and transforming it into something beautiful.
Love and compassion.
Which is the unitive state of love and compassion. And so working with the shadow is that process. I'm going to take my worst fears, my darkest stuff, and transform it into actually being kind of good at loving other people. A resilient kind of love.
So if you got a kick out of the penises and the vaginas being womb fears, then
You mean in the horror movies?
Yeah.
When you watch for... Is it that what you meant?
I guess, yeah, sure. Then the shadow is the ego fear. Right? So the shadow is, as the shadow is to the ego, the penis and vagina womb fears are to the womb. Right? So now horror movies can be entertaining. Oh, look at the big vagina with teeth, right? Or there's the big penis that's going to get everybody, right? So now with the shadow, it's the same thing. Oh, there's that terror of being alone in the universe. Yeah, if you're alone with the universe.
Not a bad place to be.
Wouldn't you rather be alone in the universe and feel separate from the universe and alone? Anyway, yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, Tom. Well, of course.
With the shadow work and bringing up like the deep fears and the junk.
You don't have to bring them up.
I
don't mean to be picky, but you don't have to do anything. As my meditation teacher, master, he's passed on, he says, shut up and get out of the way. It all unfolds by itself. This is the great ego shock. You don't have to do anything. You just have to shut up and let it happen, and it's all gonna roll out like a movie.
Okay, well, that comes to my question.
Okay.
I notice all this stuff's in my head.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just gross crap, and it's tumbling in my head, my internal mental dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to voice it or bring it out because I know that it's shit. I know it's the dark shadow stuff. So part of me knows that what do I do with that?
You take this finger, you put it here. You take this finger and you put it here, and then you push up. That's a famous mudra from Tibet. Everybody's got the same shit, dear. So you don't have to tell anybody because they already thinking the same stuff.
If they're looking.
Everybody has a
that's
day.
your shit. Oh, it looks just like mine. We can talk about it if you want, but
It's painful just keeping it just.
Okay, so the shit's not the issue. You think the shit is the issue, but the shit isn't the issue. The issue is your feeling that you can't speak to anybody about it, or that you can't acknowledge it, or that you can't confess it, or that you can't. We don't want to express shit. Everybody's got the same shit. We don't need more expression and more shit. We got lots of it.
Yeah.
However, we do not want to feel like we're trapped in our shit. So just suffice it to say that you say, wow, Krista? Sharon. Sorry. Sharon, like I got all the shit going on in my mind and it is ugly. And she goes, yeah, well, mine's uglier than yours. And then you're done. It's not like you're not saying, you don't have to download your negativity. You just can't suppress it. You don't have to express it. So you don't suppress it, you don't express it. You simply say, yeah, shitty day going on here. You're done.
Okay.
But if you feel that you can't speak, then you need to find your voice. So
Got it.
Exercise is, Thomas, you ready? Sensei,
Sensei.
I just got all this really fucking miserable, shitty, murdering, killing, fuck, going on right now.
Sensei. It's
Yeah.
got all this terrible shit going on right now.
Okay, that's nice. Can we move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
So that saves you hours and hours and hours of fighting.
It's compost.
It's compost.
It starts out yucky,
Yeah, look at a compost pile. Good point.
right? And if we don't do anything with it, it's kind of stays yucky. But if you kind of put it where it belongs, it becomes really valuable and useful.
Look at all the flowers and fruits and vegetables.
So practically speaking, spend time with people who you can have those kinds of conversations with, that'll be like, oh yeah, my shit smells too, right?
If
and
I
not be upset by yours, right?
if I can go a little farther with you, Thomas, you're trapped in another problem.
Okay.
And the problem you're actually trapped in, you need to be good. I need to be good, therefore I can't be bad. So because you need to be good, anything bad coming up means you're bad. So drop needing to be good, and you won't have to worry about being bad, because you're not trying to be good to prove everybody, your mom and dad, whoever, how good you are. You're just like the rest of us. You're a mess.
And if I can put that in another way,
Yeah.
I think is composting takes time,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And it
Composting
does
takes time.
smell along the way, right? There's issues,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But you got to know, eventually it's gonna come out okay.
And that's the spiritual path right there in a nutshell. The spiritual path is a purification. It's simply purifying the compost material into loam. Hummus?
Yeah.
Hummus? Hummus?
Humus.
Humus.
Eventually hummus.
Did I see a hand?
I was just going to ask, would that be like the fear of being evil?
Yeah, the fear of being evil or the fear of being, yeah. If I admit that, I'm going to be abandoned. Or if I allow that, I'm going to be annihilated. Or if I allow that, I'm going to go insane. If I communicate that, I'm going to be crazy.
That's a good catch, Karen.
Your son's apartment isn't looking as appealing.
That's a
Try
really
with the windows open.
Oh, right.
That's a very important part of the spiritual path, because once we start looking, we're sort of like, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff, right? And we've got to look in order to transcend it and transform it. So it's a kind of irony. Here we are trying to, be in this unitive state, and we have to start by realizing we're totally not.
Oh, and we gotta,
that can be challenging.
and we gotta go one step farther. You're Christian born, whether you're Christian or not. Whether you're Christian or not anymore, it doesn't matter. You're raised in a genealogy of Christianity.
Our culture's Judeo-Christian.
Culture's Judeo-Christian, and they believe in something called original sin.
Right.
And whether you're there or not anymore, it's in the
It's
compost.
In the system.
It's in the system. And from an Eastern point of view, your original nature is pure, and you just missed it.
Yeah,
So sin, the word sin means to miss the mark, like bad aim. So okay, I shot the arrow at the target and I missed. I'm sinning. Doesn't mean you're bad. You just need to take another shot. So that's the difference between East and West in a
So
nutshell.
if you like go to Asia and have good Asian friends, they're like, wait a minute, you think you're bad when you're born? They hear about beliefs in Judeo-Christianity, and they're like, why do you guys believe that? Because that is not part of their culture. And you're like, yeah, good question. Why do we believe that? Because as Sensei said, in Hinduism and Buddhism, they believe that your original nature is pure.
Transcendent, love and compassion. And you just kind of blew it. Your ego got kind of hooked, and you got upset.
It takes a while to translate from one system to another.
It takes a long time to weed that one out. because it goes very, very deep into your mom and dad and their mom and dad and their mom and dad and their mom and dad.
I think that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Yes, Karen.
Do you have any suggestions for any kind of homework, home play for us for the next couple of weeks? For the next class?
Oh, what a good
What a good idea.
What a good idea.
I think I would go and try to find 2 conflicting emotions that you have, or 3, let's guess. Try and go and find 3 conflicting emotions you have and look, don't get trapped in the event. Try to look behind the conflicting emotion and find what the hurt is.
You mean in like previous relationships?
No,
Or
I mean
anything
like as a, like without the relationship, like,
within yourself?
yeah, thank you. Within yourself, like what's the hurt that you've been abandoned or you've been misunderstood or nobody's listening to you or whatever it is. And then look for 3 views that you hold that you don't even question or don't examine. They're just unexamined.
This would be, that was what I was going to suggest. The second one, I was going to suggest look for conditioning, like cultural or familial or tribal conditioning. And that's kind of fun because it just comes up in different relationships when, you know, someone you're close to was like, oh, you think that? Oh, or they think something really different and mirror back what we think. Right?
Can we think of-
we just realize that there are other options.
Let's think of an example just to help maybe. So let's say Catherine thinks that when you're having a fight that you just step back and you don't talk. Give it a space to, you know, find your calm or center or whatever. And I think that if you have a problem or a difficulty, you got to work it out.
Lean in, and yes.
So, you know, if my default strategy is not to talk, if my default strategy is to talk it out, and her default strategy is to not talk
Is
it out,
to give it space.
what am I going to think about her, and what's she going to think about me? And because I'm not examining the view that it should be talked out. Does it make sense?
So that's one example.
And if let's say there's a particular person you work with, or somebody in your life who has a particular tone of voice, and then whenever that tone of voice comes up, you just kind of go, whose voice is that? Like you learned that response. That didn't come. Like if Ava's got that voice, I don't have that relationship with Ava. I don't know her that. You know, you've only known her a few years, right? So somebody else's voice has triggered that kind of knee-jerk thing. So thank you, Karen. Good idea.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for coming.